VPAT and Section 508 compliance. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1998 states that the U.S. government requires that all electronic and information technology products that it procures must be accessible to people with disabilities. WCAG is a global standard for accessibility. Section 508 has adopted some of the features of WCAG, so we won't worry about that right now, but just so you have heard that and are aware of the global standard also. To show 508 compliance, companies producing applications for the U.S. government and other customers that demand 508 compliance complete a VPAT. VPAT stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. A VPAT is a statement or report you generate to declare that your product or service claims to conform to the Section 508 standards. The VPAT will state that your product is either 100% compliant, partially compliant if it gets 80% or higher on the VPAT, and anything below 80% is not Section 508 compliant. The VPAT declares the level at which your product is considered accessible. Many employers, especially the U.S. government and its agencies, require their products and applications to be Section 508 compliant. And the U.S. government had an $81 billion budget this year just for IT. Meaning, in theory, you can be a Fortune 500 company with just a single customer, the U.S. government. Not having a VPAT for your product means you aren't even invited to the bidding table, which means it's hard to even quantify the missed opportunities by not having a VPAT. The leadership of CA Technologies have also stressed the importance they give ethical and moral issues, and we are all held to the company's standards. Making our products as accessible as we can doesn't just enable those with disabilities to use our products. Developing with Section 508 and the VPAT in mind make our products easier to use for everyone, and generally helps the user experience. Ideally, you develop applications and write documentation with accessibility in mind, as we are creating, making it much easier to be compliant. Fixing VPAT issues after the product has gone GA is much, much harder. It's CA Technologies' best practice to have 508 compliance built into your definition of done or acceptance criteria of your stories. At a minimum, the application, including installation, end user, and admin user interfaces, as well as user documentation, support mechanisms like help files and training videos, etc., need to be 508 compliant. What do you need to keep in mind to avoid future 508 worries? Always code with the following rules in mind. How will this feature or UI element be read by accessibility tools like a screen reader such as JAWS, or a text magnifier, or is it still usable with high contrast themes? Is this feature compatible with all of those third-party features? Because it's a requirement if you expect the US government to buy your products. At the end of this introduction, there will be links to further resources and trainings on Section 508 and VPAT, but just as an example, I'll briefly show you what the first section of a VPAT test looks like. How would I use your product if I can only use the keyboard, either because I am unable to use a mouse or because I am sight impaired and cannot see the screen? Can I navigate using only the keyboard? To the panes, the links, are there keyboard shortcuts, and is the tab order set up correctly? Are there unexpected page changes? That's fine, but how are those handled? Is there always a visible focus? Can I tell what is selected? Can I exit the page without the mouse? If I can do all of those things, your VPAT would say that for the section keyboard accessibility criterion, that it supports all functions. If it supports 80% or more of the test, it supports with exceptions, and any less than that, it does not support. Your application must work with sticky keys, filter keys, and mouse keys. Enabling sticky keys lets you complete a keyboard shortcut by pressing the keys consecutively. For example, instead of pressing Ctrl-Alt-Delete all at the same time, you can press one and then the other, so Ctrl, then Alt, then Delete. All applications must support sticky keys. Same thing for the operating system's support of filter keys and mouse keys. These are usually part of the operating system's accessibility features, but to be 508 compliant, your application must work with the operating system's accessibility features and must all be tested all together for the VPAT. And how does the screen reader do with all of your UI elements? Are there descriptions of UI elements, tables, forms, etc.? The type of form element, like the role, for example, a radio button, checkbox, drop-down, text box, etc., the label for the element, like the text or name of the element, and then the status of the element, for example, is it selected or what string is pre-filled there? Basically, if I use a text reader reading the form, am I getting all the information I need to complete the form and then also submit the form? How are you handling bitmap images? Are you keeping color and contrast in mind? Are the images color dependent? Is there a consistent meaning? Are all of your buttons or images identifiable outside of just color or just shape? What if I can't see the color, or what if I can't see the shape at all? Is the image still identified by text or some other means? And the same goes for multimedia. If I'm creating this video, it is not 508 compliant unless it has closed captions. And is your website CSS dependent? If I disable CSS, can I still navigate your site with accessibility tools? And how are your tables and columns handled? Do you have enough metadata in the tables where the reader would know the descriptions and be able to see the descriptions of the table and columns and rows? Do you have any flashing alerts or anything of that nature in your documentation or product? Flickering and flashing page elements, for instance, can trigger epileptic seizures in some readers. This can also disrupt many readers with cognitive disabilities or low vision. Test to make sure that the blink frequency is not between 2 and 55 Hz. For general usability, I would recommend the VPAT standards for simple navigation. And remember that the VPAT tests your product as it works with all of your third-party widgets and plugins and the operating system's accessibility features. If any third-party plugin fails the VPAT, so does your product. For the accessibility tools needed to run a VPAT, documentation for those tools are in the internal CA Wiki, which is cawiki.ca.com in the Tools wiki space. Technical documentation guidelines and resources can be found in the DocOps wiki space, and previous VPATs for your product can be found on QMS. The licenses, VPAT templates, and contact information can be found on ally.ca.com, spelled A11y.ca.com. Remember, it's always easier to keep this all in mind while you are developing your product than it is to fix these issues later. And ideally, you should have 508 compliance built into the acceptance criteria or the definition of done of your Agile development stories.